And like I don't know if you struggle with it, but when I wake up, that my brain races. It immediately starts. You know what I mean? And it needs that dopamine fix right off the bat. So I get everything done. I get that quick dopamine fix. Helping my animals, maintaining my animals.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Reptile Studio podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking to Nick Moore from Nick's Reptile World on Instagram and YouTube. We're going to be talking about animal care management, education, mental health, and a lot more, including a story about his mother breeding African fat-tailed geckos. So stick around and enjoy the episode. This is episode 17 of the Reptile Studio podcast. Today, we have Nick Moore from Nick's Reptile World on Instagram and on YouTube. Nick is a lifetime herper and cares for reptiles and is in school for animal care and management. So, Nick, why don't you take it away? Let us know who you are.
Absolutely. So obviously, I'm Nick from Nick's Reptile World. For the past, I'd say probably 20 years of my life, I've been a herper. My family bred geckos, and I kind of got into it from there. And for the past 3 years, since I got out of the military, I've been running a pretty successful reptile breeding and education business where I breed New Caledonian geckos, and I also go to schools to educate the youth on reptiles.
Wait, and my co-host isn't here because he's actually at a birthday party, doing a presentation now.
Ah,
So I'll be flying solo. Um, and before we get into it, I'll just make reference that yesterday, um, you and I attempted doing this, and my brain was in a total malfunction.
I
Um,
think both of our brains were there.
yeah, yeah, my I had like a spike in anxiety. My ADD was going crazy, and I was like, I just had to cut it short. Um, which is fitting because we're also going to talk about mental health.
Absolutely.
So it kind of works out. But in the intro, I mentioned school. So what's your plan for when you're finished with school, and if you want to like expound on what you're actually like working on in school?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm in animal care and management. It focuses on breeds, behaviors, animal biology, basic stuff that revolves mainly around cats, dogs, birds, and livestock. So I have another semester to go, and then I graduate. Once I graduate with my degree, I'm going to go to either UNE or probably USM for their environmental science programs that they have. I want to pursue that. That's kind of what I'm really passionate about. The animal care and management is to get myself into the door. And once I start studying, environmental science with emphasis on wildlife conservation, I'll be doing exactly what, my dream is, to do wildlife conservation and make sure that our environment is healthy, clean, and good for all beings inside.
Yeah, I think that's a good goal because I feel like there's a shift happening where people are going away from um, I don't know. Actually, I don't know if this is true, but it could be just my perception and like the circle of people within herpetoculture that I follow. But it does at least seem like people are maybe shifting away from like trying to become a big breeder and
Oh yeah,
more shifting to like education and and yeah, education,
yeah,
shifting more to
absolutely.
education and conservation.
Yeah,
Um, which I mean, honestly, and maybe I might get flack for saying this, but um, my appreciation for this planet exceeds my desire to keep any herps.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm trust me, I'm right there with you. I feel you on that one. Initially, when I got back into the hobby after I got out of the military, my main focus was just breeding, and then I started to do more educational stuff. I started to make YouTube videos, and then eventually I started going to schools, doing educational programs there. Um, but yeah, where I was going with that. um, Lost my train of thought.
yeah, that
ADHD, it's the
I
worst.
know this will be a theme. So for anybody who's going to be watching this, get ready.
Oh yeah,
And I'm not starting over again. This is the final countdown here. Um,
sir.
yeah, so we've had on quite a few guests who are, really like conservation oriented. And
Mhm.
actually, I want to say every guest that we've had is either education oriented or um, conservation oriented.
Yeah. Mhm.
And not that I don't want to interview, you know, somebody who considers themselves like a breeder. First
Mhm.
and foremost, that's not, where the podcast is right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but I think it would be good to have, some people from that side on as well. And, maybe we could be surprised, by
Yeah.
some of the stuff that they talk about.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And in the community, I've talked to different breeders, I've talked to different educators, and like I can tell you that the way that they view animals or the way they interact with animals is definitely different. It's like same, but different.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so you mentioned your mom, or well, yesterday it was your mom. Today you said family, but um, your mom breeding fat tail geckos. So how was
Yep.
that? Like being a kid and
Honestly, it was amazing. So I was around like 6 or 8 when my mom initially got her geckos, and she started to eventually breed them for the pet store down the road. And I got to interact with the geckos at a young age. I got to feed them. I got to take care of them. I got to take the eggs out, put them in the incubator, incubate the eggs, and then have them hatch out. And that was really the start of my obsession with like reptiles and amphibians. It all started there. And honestly, if I didn't have that experience at such a young age, I probably wouldn't be where I am today.
yeah, I can totally relate to that too on the side of you know, being at a young age, being at a young age and like getting into it because of somebody else. Um,
Yeah.
My
And
father and I both.
eventually, yeah, eventually my mom, she would take me out herping. She did it when she was younger. She would go catch frogs, whatever. We had a pond behind my house, and it had a whole bunch of green frogs. It had turtles. It had guppies, trout, a bunch of random stuff in there. But I would go there with a butterfly net, and I'd catch the frogs that would be sitting at the edge of the water. And I'd like put them in my hands, and I'd hold them, and I'd look at them, get a picture for my mom, and then put them back. And it was such a great experience.
Yeah, and I can relate to that with my father.
Yeah.
Him and I going out hiking all the time and just like flipping rocks and flipping, you know, uh,
Mhm.
logs and catching salamanders and um, this was like early '90s probably. I want
Yeah.
to say early to mid '90s, but like before I even knew what bioactive was, and I don't even know if the term bioactive um was even around like in the mainstream. Uh, but
Yeah, no, I think it was coined a little bit later in the
yeah,
hobby.
but he had set up like a 10-gallon like aquarium with
Mhm.
like dirt and moss and like plants from outside and like
Yeah.
little like roly polies, which we now call isopods. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it might have been a what the hell is it? A ringneck snake, a northern ringneck snake.
Okay.
So we had a
Yeah, we got
bioactive,
a bunch of those up here.
yeah, we had a bioactive enclosure, in like the mid 90s, which
That's
was really
awesome.
cool. And
Yeah, and at the time, it's not like you have all that information easily accessible. That's stuff you learn, throughout your life and through reading and
yeah,
educating yourself.
the snake didn't have any heat. It was like
Yeah,
inside, didn't have heat.
'90s.
All kinds of terrible mistakes. From being a novice and not having, and even
But
then, like
it's
having access to that information wasn't easy.
yeah, it was yeah. At that time, it definitely wasn't.
Yeah,
It's because like looking at where the hobby is now and how much we know about these animals and how like educated we have been and how easy to access this information is. It makes it so much easier to care for these animals and keep them alive for as long as they're supposed to. Um,
yeah,
Kind of
and
like
or even find. Go
back
ahead.
in the day, like sorry, yeah. Back in the day, people would be getting bearded dragons and they wouldn't know how to care for them. They wouldn't know what they actually needed. They didn't know, oh, it needs a basking spot of like 115 to 100 and 50, whatever. People didn't realize that, and that's why like at Petco they have like a life expectancy or lifespan, and it's like 4 to 6 years, where a bearded dragon should live 12 plus.
Yeah, um, and I noticed that um, with a lot of the reptiles that I had when I was younger. You know, Actually, I had a bearded dragon and at least one leopard gecko, but I might have had two before this one, but
Mm.
they both suffered from like a lot of the same issues, like you know, either not enough heat or too much heat because
Yep.
we there were no thermostats and like regulators and all that. It was just like slap a heat mat on the bottom of
Yeah.
a 10-gallon enclosure and call it a day.
Call
Um,
it a day. Hope it doesn't burn the enclosure
right, and
or your
and
animal.
and the animal, and we used reptile carpet, which
Ooh.
is like a breeding ground for bacteria, and
Yeah. Breeding
a
ground for
leopard
broken
gecko's
toes too.
yeah, leopard gecko's nail can get stuck in it, and when
Yeah.
they have terrible sheds because you don't have the a humid hide and you're not
Yeah.
maintaining the proper humidity, that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly. And
Um,
there's only one like sort of matte type thing that I would ever suggest, and it's that it's a sheet of leather and it's got like silicone pieces of rocks on it. That's the only one that I would ever even bother using as like a substrate replacement.
yeah, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. I have one. It's like the desert something.
Yeah, I
Um,
can't remember the name of it. I use it
yeah,
for a couple of my enclosures.
yeah. Actually, they've been in the box that they came in for like 3 or 4 years. I haven't opened them, but I
Well,
have
if you
them.
don't want them, I'll take them.
Yeah, no, we'll talk after. It's possible. But yeah, like the amount of information that's available now
Yeah.
is it's really good. For the animal, it's excellent.
Mm.
Um, but it's also, I think, it can be a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah,
Um,
for
you know,
sure.
it, not that everyone will always ever be on the same page about animal care and management, but
Yeah.
um, to have a very strong voice in like the breeder community
Mhm.
and a very strong voice in like the husbandry, pet oriented community. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of like misinformation or like mixed information out there. Um,
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of mixed information, especially with I know that with green tree pythons and stuff like that. Usually breeders keep them in small little totes like this big, with barely any enrichment, just a water bowl and like something to climb on. And then somebody will buy that and they'll get it in and they put it into a bioactive enclosure or whatever is completely the opposite of what they were in their entire life. And then the animal stops eating for them. And then they think, oh, this is like, this is your fault. It's not my fault because I have my husbandry correct and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like, you want to slowly transition. You don't want to, go straight from a tote to a bioactive. That's going to stress out the animal. It's going to make them not want to eat.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And do you know who Lori Tarini is?
I do not.
So Lori Tarini, we had her as a guest. She's awesome. Um, she is an animal behavior specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And she does like, horses and dogs and, all
Kind of
that stuff.
same lines of what I'm studying right now,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. But she also specializes in snakes.
Okay.
Um, and she does a lot with target training. It's because of her
Mm.
that my snakes are target trained. Um,
Yeah.
and for anybody who isn't, who doesn't know what target training is, it's, you know, most snakes that I know of, they see blue and green the best. Like that's their like they really key in on blue and green color. Um, so I have a target that a green target attached to a stick, and um, in the beginning, I introduced the target and the prey together
Mhm.
um, until they got used to that, and then I would just show the target, and they would follow the target, and they would, I would, have them come out of the enclosure instead of putting them in
Mhm.
a like a temporary like tote to like clean the enclosure. I could put them onto like an activity station, which I recently broke down because I just don't have enough room for it. Um,
Yeah.
but I say that because Lori Tarini says in some of her videos, she references how if a snake that she got um, came from Iraq, she will put that snake in a small enclosure and put that little small enclosure, a tub or like a tiny 10 gallon or whatever it is, into
Mhm.
like a 4x2
Mhm.
enclosure and allow the snake to have access
That's pretty
outside of its
smart.
little enclosure. So the snake
Mhm.
can on its own venture out and get used to, a bigger space. And I wish I had known that when I got my first ball python and my
Mhm.
only ball python, which I ended up rehoming because I put her into a 4x2 bioactive, light, full light cycle and the whole nine. And she didn't eat the entire time. It was about
Mhm.
9 months. She didn't eat the entire time. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. You know,
Mhm.
I rehomed her to somebody I know who actually put her back into a rack and she started eating
Yeah.
right away. So that to me, that says, that there's a shock that happens.
Yeah, and it's
Uh,
it's the same thing as, bring so imagine you're a kid, right? And you spend most of your time with your family, maybe you go to school, whatever. But imagine you're, this little kid and all of a sudden you're plopped dead center of New York City. You know what I mean? You're gonna be anxious. You're gonna be, a little worried. It's kind of the same concept, you know what I mean? Like you going from one space to something that's completely different is a big change for an animal. And I do think that's actually a really great idea. What you said. What's her name?
Lori
Um,
Tarini.
Lori Tarini. What she said. That's actually a really, really good idea to have the enclosure inside of a bigger enclosure for that transition and allow them to access both the smaller and the bigger enclosure if they want to, venture out. Because they have to analyze that whole space. You know what I mean? Sometimes they won't go completely out. Maybe they'll just like do a couple tongue flicks, like check out the corners, and go back into the small enclosure. Um, you could also do it with like getting the tote size that they were in from the breeder, but going a step bigger than that, and maybe adding like fake plants and stuff like that, more climbing spaces, stuff like that. But both of them should work.
Yeah, and it's the same with like cats and dogs too. Like when
Mhm.
you move from one place to another, or you adopt an animal, like my cat that I have.
Yeah.
Um, the first week that he was here, he just stayed in my room.
Hmm.
He didn't have the whole house. Um, and I know from other people's experience that sometimes, especially with cats, um, putting them in a brand new space and it's a larger space than they're used to, um, it's not a good situation.
Yeah.
Their whole like personality is like they're very timid,
Yeah.
very shy, scared.
Honestly,
You know,
it goes for all animals, even humans.
yeah,
It's a system shock almost. It's a little
yeah,
bit overwhelming that there's more space. Like, for example, like when I bought my house, like I went from an apartment that was a lot smaller to a bigger house, and I've got all this space, and I'm like, oh, I'm stressing out. I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with this space. What can I do with this space? Stuff like that. Um, I know I'm not trying to anthropomorphize myself with animals, but it's generally the same concept.
yeah. I mean, we're animals, so I mean, it makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
and that and so as far as like you know animal care management for schooling,
Mhm.
I mean, do you delve into like behavior at all, like animal
Oh yeah.
behavior, or
Yeah, so this semester I'm actually in a breeds and behavior course. It's mainly focusing on cats, dogs, and birds. But we're studying, we're analyzing behaviors, the different, quirks, different, small things that usually nobody would notice. Like I am learning so much from this course that, and like I can transition a lot of it over to the animals and vice versa. Because I study, I look at my animals, I analyze, I have a very analytical way of thinking. So I analyze, what's their movement, what's their temperament like, are they excited? What's the tongue flicks looking like? Stuff like that. So it kind of goes hand in hand with reptiles. Sadly, we don't cover reptiles in this course because I live in Maine, where apparently nobody even cares about reptiles. Um, so hopefully, eventually, I want to. I know there's a place in Georgia that does a herpetological course that you can get certified as like a master herpetologist, and I do want to do that as well eventually. Probably when I'm off from school or whenever I can line everything up.
yeah. So to get into that, like to get into the field that you want to get into, like how much um is it like the whole school experience, or is it like tailored to that, like or
It's
like
the it's kind of a bit of both. I got my prerequisites and stuff like that I need to knock out of the way before I can focus on the animal care part. And it's stuff that doesn't really relate. Like I'm in accounting right now. I don't I don't see how that relates to caring for animals that much on a physical level, not a admin level. But
yeah,
um, yeah, no. So once I'm done with this, and I start my education for environmental science, I want to get my doctorate. That's my dream. That's my goal is to get a doctorate in it, and work for the state biologist or something along those lines, and really focus on conservating what we have and keeping the environment that we have.
yeah, that's like I'm always in my mind, I'm always trying to like find like a back way into something, which I know which I know it's possible. I mean, I
Mhm.
know there's people that have done that. Um, like the idea of like going back to school, like freaks me out. Um,
Yeah, I'm only 26 and I feel weird because I'm surrounded by 18-year-olds and I can't relate to them at all. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
Um, but it's, I'm not the youngest, I'm not the oldest, so
yeah,
everybody's there to learn. No matter how old you are, it shouldn't stop you from trying to get an education that you want something for something that you're passionate about.
yeah. Um, so we were talking about and we were talking about the animal behavior and transitioning from one one bin into another bin or to an enclosure and or in a cat into a brand new house.
Mm.
Um, that that behavior, like the being scared, the not wanting to eat, um,
Mhm.
like that's all like anxiety based
Yeah, it is,
behavior.
and it's
And
anxiety is a natural fight or flight, type of a response. And animals are always in fight or flight.
yeah, so when it comes to like that, I feel like um, a lot of human beings can actually relate
Mhm.
to animals um,
Yeah,
on that level. I would say probably like a majority of humans. I don't know if it was
yeah,
always the majority, but I think today it's
oh
probably
yeah,
the majority, like
it is
51% or greater.
probably
Um,
greater, probably like 60.
yeah. So I think that there's a space in mental health, like on an individual basis,
Hmm.
and even on like a community basis
Yeah,
for herpetoculture to sort of enter into the conversation about mental health. Because I know
mm.
for me, the like the total like zoning out that I do, like when I'm either handling a snake or watching a snake in the enclosure, even like feeding a snake. Um, I totally like zone out and everything is just focused on that and
Yeah,
like the tactical feel of like a snake moving through your hands
mhm.
and stuff is like very calming for me. And
Yeah,
I know it's not like that for everybody, but um I think that there's a place for that, in
yeah.
treating mental health.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, if you look at reptiles and amphibians too, I mean, really any animal, for the most part, it's a form of therapy. It's a form of grounding yourself from whatever's going on up here or in here. It helps you, like, and forces you to relax yourself, forces you to focus on that animal and what they're doing and how they're feeling. And it almost makes you think about how you're feeling and what you're doing, outside of the animals a little bit. And it kind of calms you down and brings you back, to a good state of mind.
Yeah, and I've had a therapist. We've had a therapist on the podcast, Bill Stewart, and we've had
Yeah.
a really like lengthy conversation about this. Um,
Hmm.
and I know that he feels the same way that I do about it. And people should. I urge people to watch that episode or listen whenever it becomes available on um, streaming, podcast streaming sites. But the thought of being able to collect data on that, um,
Hmm.
I think is really invaluable. Um, and since he's a therapist, I think he's got he's got a leg up as far
Mhm.
as trying to get something like that started. Um,
Yeah.
and I know talking to you, dealing with anxiety and depression, and also being in, an educator, um,
Mhm.
that also gives you a leg up
Yeah.
on that. If you were to be more like vocal about like mental health. I don't, and I don't know you outside of this, but I think it would be really cool for like people,
Yeah.
like me, to say like, listen, like I have super ADD, I have like anxiety and
Mhm.
depression, like the whole gamut of like, you know, lower level like mental whatever.
Yeah.
And I believe this, and this is why. And I think it would be kind of, interesting to get a bunch of people to kind of sit down, maybe like over Zoom or something to kind of hash something out. Like, how do we do this? I don't know how
Yeah.
you feel about that, but I mean, I take it you like that idea.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's just, something to think about. And um, I'm in fairly regular contact with Bill Stewart.
Mhm.
So you're definitely somebody who I would want to bring into the conversation about, how does that happen? How do we go about that? Um,
Mhm.
because I feel like the benefits outweigh the negatives of people um, experiencing, you know, reptiles, on that basis. And we talked when we talked yesterday. Um, I was talking about snakes and like smaller Burmese pythons and
Yeah.
even like boa constrictors and like carpet pythons, is one thing, but there's also like um, rhino iguanas and
Yep.
tortoises, that
Absolutely.
also could be um, really important, aspects of treating mental health, with animals.
Yeah. And it all comes down to what the person likes most. You know what I mean? Like all reptiles for the most part, I'd say that they have a different, each one's different. You know what I mean? Like a carpet python is going to act differently than a boa constrictor. A tortoise is going to act differently than a rhinoceros iguana. A tegu is going to act differently than a monitor. It all comes down to like people need to do the research to see what is this animal like to others. Is this a fit for me? You know what I mean? Um, and like even people who have fears of snakes, you know what I mean? Like they have the option to get a lizard, they have the option to get a tortoise, monitor whatever it is that fits them personally, and that whatever is going on, with them, if they have any mental issues, um, for sure.
Yeah, so I think, as far as um, education goes beyond like what you or I or my co-host do on a personal level, like going
Mhm.
somewhere and like talking. It also is about like talking on this podcast,
Yeah.
um, and sort of um, crafting a sort of a message, or not even like a message, but like I'm trying to think of like a word for it, but like a curriculum, but not a curriculum. Just
It's like a little educational seminar almost.
yeah, like yes, I mean, this species is from, Nicaragua, the viper gecko is from Pakistan, and it lives in this, sort of environment, and you know, we need to conserve it is one aspect, but I think the other aspect for some educators anyway, could also be how that animal makes them feel. which
Yeah.
I know it's when you're educating a group of people, there's all kinds of, like a library. I mean, you have so many different
Yeah.
personality types there.
Without a
Um,
doubt.
so I know most people who make a living doing that, like educational shows, that'd be like kind of a tall ask, like a tough ask
Hmm.
to get personal. But I think that there's definitely space um, for people to combine, the two of those things together.
Yeah, and I mean sharing, your own personal experiences about things, especially with like the animals and stuff like that. I think it's really important so that, others can see how you're experiencing it as well. Maybe they may connect with you, it may not. Maybe it'll get their brain to start thinking. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So um, change of quick change of topic here, but
All right.
is there anything crazy that has happened to you, evolving, herpetology over the years? Any crazy stories?
Crazy. I mean, the craziest thing that's happened to me is my ex-girlfriend stole an enclosure and a gecko for my house. And I didn't notice until like the day after I got back that there was an entire enclosure missing. And that was a nightmare to try to get the enclosure back and the gecko and everything. And that was probably the craziest story that I have in terms of like my reptile keeping. But in terms of like animals, I haven't had any like crazy things happen with my animals. Nothing wild. I mean, the most that's happened is like at an educational event, I had a gecko bite a little girl because it was stressed out. It's just a little leopard gecko, and she came up to me and she's like, "It's okay. I have leopard geckos too. I know they do that sometimes." And I was like, "Oh, that's adorable," but I'm also really sorry.
Yeah.
um,
Um, yeah, actually, I don't have anything nutty either, really, except um, I very recently, like within the last month, lost my male garter snake.
mm,
Um, like
sorry to hear
lost,
you
lost,
lost.
like
Oh,
gone,
like escaped,
just from my hands. Like I was redoing the enclosure
mm,
and
probably must on you and slipped out of your hands,
I
huh?
pulled them out and I was because they're babies. So
Oh,
I was
okay.
being like very cautious with how I handled it.
Yeah.
Um, and I should have been a little less cautious
Mm-hmm.
because it wiggled right out from my hands and just vanished.
Mm-hmm.
Long gone, nowhere to be
That
found.
that has happened to me so many times. Eventually I find them, but yeah, reptiles is that's the thing that people don't realize is that reptiles can escape. They can do it pretty easily. And it can come down to like you forget to latch something, you don't put enough weight on top of a lid, you didn't have a proper seal, stuff like that. And it's kind of just
Yeah,
like one of those things that you have to almost expect to happen at some point, unless you're literally locking your enclosures, which you should do if you have venomous. But,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
but
I
yeah,
actually had
no,
what'd you say?
I'm done.
Okay. I actually had speaking of leaving an enclosure door open, I left the my children's python's enclosure open, and he got out, and I'm looking all over the place. I'm searching the room, um, looking all over, and I look up, and he's hanging from like like in the closets that have the things that hang, and there's like a bar that goes
Racks.
across.
Yeah, the rack.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the rack. So he was actually hanging from one of those brackets. And obviously was like terrified
Yeah.
because he was like wide open in the middle. Um, and he actually bit my eyelid. Like my top and bottom
Oh, the
eyelid were
eye.
bit shut
Oh, they're probably
from this
swollen
little
too.
children's python.
Yeah.
It freaked me out, but I didn't panic. I he wasn't letting go. I was rubbing his tail, kind of squeezing and rubbing the tail
Yeah.
to try and get him to let
Hmm.
go. And I don't know if you have any experience with children's pythons, but they're tough.
Yeah.
Like they're great pets, and I think they're a great beginner snake, honestly. Um,
They are.
but when they do bite,
They
and
don't want to let go.
they don't want to let go, they're
It's the
very
same
tough.
thing with
So I,
carpet pythons.
I had to run
Uh,
his face under water to
I
get him
find
to.
that the easiest way to get a snake to let go of you if they're latched on and they're not letting go is use mouthwash.
Yeah,
Just pour
people have
mouthwash
said
into their
that.
mouth. Yeah, that'll make them let go almost immediately. But
I
actually,
think.
your story reminds me of I'm surprised I completely forgot about this because it happened recently. So I had an enclosure, and there was this little gasket that I accidentally put on the wrong side when I installed the enclosure, and it blew out. And my snake, my male carpet python got out, and he was missing for like a week, and I was like, okay, he's eventually gonna pop up somewhere. So, one night I go to sleep and I wake up, my eyes open, and the first thing I see is my carpet python on my lamp on my nightstand staring at me. And I was like, well, there you are.
Yeah,
um,
they get around.
yeah, they do. That's for
I,
sure.
my mother was over last weekend, and we walked into the reptile room, and my carpet python, and her enclosure door was open, and
Mhm.
my mother's like, "You left the door open, or why'd you leave the door open?"
Mhm.
And I told her, I said, if she, if she wants to come out of that enclosure, she can, because
Yeah.
there's nowhere for her to escape.
Mhm.
She'll always be in that room. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't leave it open like indiscriminately. Like if I'm
Yeah.
going back and forth, if I'm cleaning, this and that, I'll open the door and just give her the option to come out. Now she never will. Like the
Mhm.
most I've gotten her to actually come out of the enclosure was like maybe like a foot of her body. Her head was like out of the enclosure and like sniffing around like down below. But that's the
Yeah.
farthest she'll come out unless I have a target. Um,
Mhm.
but we have to know the animals.
Yeah.
We have to know what can happen, what they can do, what they won't do, or what we think they won't do. Because I mean, if something can happen, it will happen.
Yeah.
So
I
um,
find that with reptiles, it's a lot of trial and error. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, I I'm not going to claim that I am an absolute expert because really nobody is in the community. Um, but yeah, no, I don't know.
yeah. Um, so when you're done with school, um, you know, so so when you're done with your so when you graduate now, or like
Yeah.
your upcoming type of graduation, like what will that be, like a master's or a
Uh,
bachelor's or what?
maybe a bachelor's um for animal care because it's not really a master course at my community college. It's more so just to kind of like get my foot into the door with education about animals because I went from high school to the military, so I didn't, I had 5 years of a lack of education, so I couldn't go to a university. Um, it, and like I have ADHD, and when I was in high school, I was like, well, all this stuff sucks, screw this, I'm just going to join the military because that's a great idea. Then I don't have to actually study, I don't have to do any of this coursework or anything like that. And now, I have to go to like I had to start with a community college to start the educational. That makes any sense.
Yeah. So what's your goal, in the short term, as far as like, do you plan on like
I do want to.
volunteering? or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
working under somebody or
I do want to try and volunteer for the New England Herpetological Society. Um, on top of that, I've been thinking about, looking to work for maybe like enclosure companies, reptile product companies, stuff like that, because they need animal care management experts to tell them, hey, like this is a good idea, or hey, this is a terrible idea and you shouldn't do it. Um, but I kind of gonna do that in the meantime, and then after that, or once I start my education, I'm gonna focus more on that because I do want to get my doctorate, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's gonna take me 6 to 8 years. So I'll be in my 30s for sure. By the time I'm done with my education.
yeah. So when you're done, so in the future, 10 years from now or whatever, 10, 12, 8, whatever years, what's the goal for you, like specifically, or do you have a goal,
So
like a
my goal is
specific goal?
my specific goal is to be able to spend at least 10 years traveling, going to different countries and working with different animal species in those countries in different environments. Because environmental scientists get sent all over the world. Um, I primarily want to actually go to Australia. That's like my bucket list thing, to go to Australia to be able to work with the wildlife there, and the environment, and kind of, just have that experience. And then once I'm done, with my traveling and stuff like that, I figured I'd stay, maybe work with a state biologist, in whatever state I end up in, um, and focus on just in the States, doing stuff in the States. So that way I can have like a family and all that stuff, because it's kind of hard to have a family when you're exploring the world.
Yeah. um, yeah. So I mean, that's a awesome goal. That's a great goal. Um, I hope more people, I'm not even going to say in herpetology, but more people in the animal world um, have that same drive and that same type of goal, um, to not be an animal creator,
Yeah.
to be a creator on the internet, which I mean you can do. I mean people do both. You can be a creator and like you know a
I I'm all over the
a
board.
biologist.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm studying, animal biology. I'm reading. I'm, doing educational stuff. I'm making YouTube videos. Yeah, I do want to do more YouTube, but like a lot of my time is consumed by the animals, by, schooling. I'm a disabled veteran, so I have a lot of appointments that I have to go to. Um, so my time is very limited, on what I can do.
yeah.
But
Um, but I think you're definitely on the right track. Um, and I say that almost as a kind of like a self reassurance too,
yeah,
that I'm on the right track because
you are.
more times than not, I feel like I'm not.
See,
So I have
I think
to,
that's just ADHD and mental health, like anxiety and stuff like that, telling you, these things. And like,
yeah,
so for me, one thing that I struggle with because of, my CPTSD, my ADHD, my anxiety, my depression, is feeling like I'm in like imposter syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before.
yeah, yep.
Where like no matter how well I do, or how much I know, I feel like I'm not good enough. Does that make sense? Or like I'm
Oh
not,
yeah,
doing what
no,
I should be
totally.
doing.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like there's a good, a healthy quantity of people in herpetic culture that, kind of share that, um, sort of, that same mindset, which is, the main reason why I wanted to have you on, the
Yeah,
podcast is to talk about that and obviously talk about, education and your future and animal care and husbandry and all that. Um,
yeah, absolutely.
But oh, I was going to say something. Side note, uh, for whatever reason, I fell asleep on the couch last night, and this morning I woke up at like 4:30,
Mhm.
and I'm like, all right, I've been asleep for 4 hours or 4.5 hours, probably, maybe, yeah, probably 4.5 hours. I'm like, do I go to bed and like go back to sleep, or do I just
Mhm.
like stay up? And
Yeah,
I decided to stay up,
that's usually how it goes.
and yeah, so I went into my the reptile room, and I could only see two of the viper geckos, and I put up cork. Do you watch Dion from Reptiliatus?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so he uses that the cork tile, like the cork background things.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
so I did that, but they were too tight to where one of them kind of like bowed out a little bit,
Mm.
and one of the viper geckos actually got
Uh, Probably
down
got to through the top. Yeah.
in behind that. So I spent like 2 hours this morning redoing
It's a
redoing
pain
all
in the
that.
ass.
Um,
Yeah.
but it was actually a good way to start the day to actually to be productive,
Yeah.
because a lot of times I'll get up and like I'll eat breakfast and I'll just like sit on the couch and like hours will go by and I'm like, oh fuck, like I have to do something,
Yeah. The
So
first thing that I do when I wake up is, I go down to my animal room, I take the dehumidifier, I empty it out. I check the food, who needs their food replaced. Usually the geckos will wait till nighttime. But like my iguana, my tegu, I replaced whatever food, they need. And I kind of just like do my checks. I do my rounds. I check each animal, I check my turtles, my fish, my frogs, everything.
yeah,
And then from there, I take care of my dog, and then I take care of myself. But it almost reminds me like, hey, these guys need to eat, but I also need to eat. You know what I mean? It kind of brings me into that focus, focus on, what I need to do, what I need to get done.
yeah. And plus the animals rely on us.
Oh yeah, they
Like
do.
they won't eat if we don't feed them. So in that aspect too, like doing something, good for somebody or something else, kind of like takes me out of myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
And like I don't know if you struggle with it, but when I wake up, that my brain races. It immediately starts. You know what I mean? And it needs that dopamine fix right off the bat. So I get everything done. I get that quick dopamine fix, helping my animals, maintaining my animals. Um, and
yeah,
it,
see,
it kind of helps me a little bit.
I'm actually the opposite.
Yeah.
When I wake up is I have to like force myself
Yeah, I mean, that's what
do
I
that
I
stuff.
have. Yeah, I do that too. And the way I force myself is like you said, like I remind myself like nobody's going to care for these animals but me.
Right.
They rely on me, and I treat all of my animals like they're, my children, you know. So it's very important for me to make sure that they're good. And if they're not good, then I'm not good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. Um, yeah, so I think, education, um, you know, or educating, being an educator, you know, dealing with mental health and um going to school, like that's a full plate.
Oh
That's
yeah,
that's
trust
definitely a
me.
full plate.
Yeah,
Um, so
it does make it a little bit more challenging to take care of the amount of animals that I have because I have over 150 animals if you include the fish. Reptiles alone probably like close to 50 or like 40s, 50s. Um, so I have a lot of animals and it's just me. It used to be me and my ex, but it's now it's just me. So I do get burnt out on some days, like I'll admit it. That's what happens when, you have a lot of animals. You can get burnt out really easily, especially if you don't have any help. Um, but yeah, I don't know where I was going with
Yeah,
that.
no, that's all good. I think it's a good transition towards, the closing section uh
Yeah.
of this episode. But is there anything that you wanted to talk about before we close out, or
Um, not really. I mean, the only thing that, I was gonna bring up was like obviously the burnout. And it happens with more than just feeders. It happens with just keepers in general. That sometimes, like I know for me, like I get an animal and it's like, this is amazing. I'm like, I want to get another one so I can see what that one's like. And then I get one more animal and then one more animal. I end up with a lot. You know what I mean? And it's good to pace yourself and to gauge what you're capable.
yeah,
Sometimes I overestimate what I'm capable of, especially when I've got all this stuff going on, and then I get burnt out. Um, I still take care of the animals. I still do everything. It's just some days it's a little, obnoxious or it's exhausting to have to do. But yeah,
yeah.
that's all I
I
got.
I actually find taking care of the roach colony to be like the most annoying thing, if I'm
Oh
being honest
yeah.
with you,
Yeah, taking care
because
of feeders is a pain.
because the food,
Yep.
like
Replacing
if I
food,
don't replace
gels.
that food often, it just turns into a thing of mold,
Yep.
like just and that happens, um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, it happens. We make mistakes. Sometimes the roaches have mold on their plate. Um,
Yeah.
it's not all the time, but it has happened because of that burnout. And I don't even have a lot of animals.
Yeah.
Um,
And,
so
and
that just
people need to realize that there's no such thing as perfection in keeping reptiles. There isn't. There's not a one size fits all. Everything's different. Every animal's different. Um, so I mean that's something that people really need to keep in mind.
yeah, definitely. So all right, so I'm good. I've said that I'll all I need to say. I mean,
All right.
for this episode anyway, I'm sure I'll have more stuff to say to you
Absolutely.
coming up. Um, but I appreciate you coming on,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
dealing with me flying solo.
No, you're good.
Because if Brian was here, we would still be talking. Like we'd be
Yeah.
halfway through right now.
Mhm.
Which is fine because he is excellent at talking. He's an educator.
Yeah.
So that works out. I'm an absorber. Like I sit back and like I absorb things.
I do
Um,
the same thing.
so I appreciate you being the guinea pig, on a
All right.
solo
Yeah,
episode.
absolutely. I,
But
I had a lot of fun. I mean, I honestly I could talk about this stuff for days, you know.
yeah. So where can people find you
They can
on
find me on Instagram at Nick's Reptile World. Same with TikTok. It's under the same tag. And my YouTube is also Nick's Reptile World as well. You can look me up on there for any educational videos or kind of like care guides for different species.
Nice. Yeah. So people who are watching slash listening, go do that. And if you don't, unfollow. Um, so, all right, Nick, I will let you go. But
All
thanks again
right.
for coming on, and we will talk soon.